Tucker's looking at this and saying, look, this kid exists. His audience exists. If you were to erase that kid from the historical record, like Stalin style, Photoshop him out of all the photos and just get rid of him completely, that audience is still going to be there. And there are a lot of people who are susceptible to a very specific type of influence. And if we can talk to a guy, if a guy like Nick Fuentes is willing to come on and have a cordial conversation with Tucker, leave that line of communication open a bit so that they can, they're just leave the line of communication open. It gives him one foot in the real world, and you want that audience, which is, I'm telling you, it is massive and extremely active, very energetic. You want them being influenced by a guy who has one foot in the real world, because there are way worse alternatives than Nick Fuentes, and that's, it's kind of a gamble. You're giving him a little more mainstream credibility by having him on the show, and maybe you're just totally naive and he's a totally cynical actor, total psychopath who's just using you to expand. Maybe, but I don't think you really put us in any worse position than we're already in by just having some hope that that we can do that. You're never going to turn Nick into, he's never going to go grovel on the steps of, the ADL at the feet of Jonathan Greenblatt or something like that. Obviously he's going to be like a far right firebrand until the day he dies. And he's not going to do anything that makes him feel like he's just disowning his audience and all the things he's ever said. He's not going to do anything like that. He's going to be a guy that's always going to piss off John Podhoretz. That's not an issue. But again, he's a very real entity, dude. When he had his stream, his first stream after the Charlie Kirk assassination, he had 400 something thousand people watching live on freaking Rumble. I mean, that's I don't know if Trump could get 400,000 people watching him live on Rumble, honestly. I mean, it's just, and so this is somebody that has to be reckoned with, has to be dealt with. And, ostracizing him, trying to pound him down in the box and kick him to the curb has not worked. It does, and it's never going to work.
And they tried hard too. They did.
They threw everything they could at him. And, the interview itself was very compelling because he goes through that whole process of just, it's a complicated thing, right? Because he's a 26-year-old now, so you can't call him people still say oh, he's just a kid or whatever. He's not a kid. He's a grown man now. He's 26 years old. He's totally responsible for everything that comes out of his mouth, just like I am when I say stupid things, all that kind of stuff. But when you're 18 years old and really kind of a politically naive 18-year-old, 3 months ago, you were literally listening to Dennis Prager and Mark Levin. And then all of a sudden you're getting kicked off. Your bank accounts are getting canceled.
They did him like Professor Griff, man. It was
yeah. And for somebody like Professor Griff, I mean, this is a guy who's in the public eye. He's got a literal group called Public Enemy. I mean, he kind of knows what he's in. He's in that sort of in that world.
The head of his own little security force, even.
Yeah. So if you're an 18-year-old college kid and you come under that kind of pressure, especially I can tell you after my experience with Tucker last year, when I was getting denounced by the White House and all the major papers in Europe and the United States and all that, I think that would have been a hell of a lot harder to go through if I didn't have just all of these people who had my back, because it's a different time now than it was then. Nobody had his back. He was just there by himself, with literal people with guns who had just committed a triple murder earlier in the day, showing up to his house to kill him and then getting into a shootout with the police on the street outside his house. He's just a young kid who's got no sort of broader support structure. He doesn't have I had Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and other people texting me saying, don't worry, this will all pass, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. You didn't have that. And so it's very easy to get locked into that conflict mode, when that comes at you at such a young age. But, if you can extend a hand and sort of, again, not get him to repudiate anything that he believes or that he's ever said. It's not about that. It's just about, the overall influence that, that he's able to exert on people, and whether or not it's I was very encouraged, and I told him so after the Charlie Kirk assassination, because he and Charlie were enemies, if anything. And his first message after that was, it was very conciliatory, very complimentary to Charlie. He said, look, we don't get along. We didn't get along. We went at each other. I said all these things. He said all these things. All that's fine. But here's why this guy was so talented, so significant to the movement, and all these kind of things. That right now, that's what we're going to talk about. That's what we should focus on. And the important thing, I mean, shit, dude. Like last night, just think about this. You have Nick Fuentes, the arch neo-Nazi evilist, just most biggest monster. Like he doesn't even have to dress up for Halloween because he's already so scary. And he was telling his audience last night that if you're an American citizen and you're America first, he doesn't care if you're black, white, brown, like what your background is, whatever. For
Oh,
him
yeah?
to be telling that to that audience, that's significant. And like,
Yeah.
people might not like, it's not going to satisfy the progressives because he says something like, he said, if you were born here, okay, that's not going to satisfy everybody. But, that's a, it, you know, it's an important step. You know what I mean? It at least stops like sort of contributing to just throwing
Well,
more fuel on the flame.
and that may or may not have anything to do with his conversation with Tucker, but it may. I mean, I think I like the way Tucker handled the thing. I might have said some things differently or whatever, but essentially what Tucker did was take the opportunity to demonstrate the difference between the two. Because if you listen to the War Party, Tucker Carlson is Nick Fuentes. If he's taken the opportunity to be a bit more reasonable, and you know, maybe it was the assassination of Charlie Kirk that really got to him. You can't have identity politics in a society where you've got 75 different identities that can really coalesce and just fight a war of all against all. It's got to be about freedom for everybody. Because if it's about groups versus groups, if we buy into the folly of what the left has been trying to do to this society over the last 10, 15 years, especially, then we're going to make it that much worse. We're obligated to not make that same mistake that they have made.
When you persecute a group of people, whether they deserve it or not, or just whatever, like when you try to when you try to shut something down by marginalizing and persecuting, like it's one of those things where you better be willing to go all the way, because if you're not, then all you're going to do is inflame them and agitate them even more, and they're not gonna go away like as you're hoping. I mean, and people ask me because I have a lot of friends of all different belief structures, many of which would peel the paint off your walls, left, right, whatever. I've got friends who like walk down the street in leather jackets wearing totem cop patches on their jacket. I've got straight up commie friends, and people on both sides, just different, or my normie friends will ask me like, why do you associate with those people, why do you talk to them? And I always give them the same answer, and it's because somebody has to. People change over time. Maybe you did believe, like I know lots of people who believe some insane stuff when they were in their early 20s, and now they're in their early 30s and they got a couple of kids and they don't, and maybe they will when they're 40 again. Nick said on his show last night that if which is again like for his crowd is a pretty like revolutionarily open statement that if you're an American citizen, you're American first and you're on the team. Basically is what he said. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Like what they care about is the worst things he's ever said and all that. And that's who he is. And that's what he's locked into. And I think like if we're ever going to escape that cycle, like we all just have to sort of agree that we're just not going to participate in that. And,
Yeah.
and if somebody wants to come and have a cordial conversation and present their views rationally without hatred and all that, then we'll talk to them. We're not going to hold them to the worst things that they ever said. Like you can say like, Nick says a lot of horribly offensive things. Yeah, cool. You know where else you can hear all that? Go to like a Call of Duty server or like any gamer Discord or something. I mean, this is like, it's just something that you don't have to endorse it. Like a lot of it's ugly and all that, but like some of the ridiculous things that they'll like list is like, Nick said this and this and this are like if you're under 40 are so obviously just stupid jokes, but you see the reaction, and some of the people are just cynical. They're just looking for things that like sound bad and cutting them out of context. A lot of them, though, they don't. They just see that and they're like, what kind of a person would say such a thing? We have to try to find ways to make peace in that environment, though,
Yeah.
because that's just, it's not going to change. And so we just have to try.